My name's Greg Livingston. I'm a full-time faculty, actually new full-time faculty member here at OCOM. I just arrived in December.
From where?
From China.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I spent over 10 years altogether in China. In the last almost 9 years, I was there. So I did my PhD in Chinese medicine there. And I'm actually one of the only Westerners ever licensed in China to practice Chinese medicine. So I actually have a license in China.
Well, welcome to Oregon.
Thank you. It's great here.
Dr. Livingston.
Yeah. So today we'll talk about actually one of my favorite subjects, which is we call 中医养生. 中医 is Chinese medicine. 养生means yang means to nourish or cultivate. Sheng means life. So it's Chinese medicine. I just translate it as health cultivation practices. And Chinese medicine has a lot to say about this. I mean, it's a huge subject in Chinese medicine. And goes all the way back to even like the earliest existent texts in Chinese medicine. They talk about this. And then later on, like in the Song dynasty, actually, sorry, before that, Tang dynasty, which is 600 to 900 Common Era, there's one very famous physician named Sun Simiao who wrote volumes on this subject. And he himself lived to be over 100 years old. That's back when in Europe, if you lived to be 40, it was a big deal. And he's not the only one. There's another guy named Ye Fasan, who's also, I think he's Tang Dynasty. He was the Tai Yi, it's the imperial physician. He's not the only one. The emperors had many physicians actually, but he was one of this Tai Yi, and he lived to be 105. He also talked a lot about this health cultivation stuff. And of course, you know, the emperors were obsessed with longevity and preferably immortality if it could be attained. And the Taoists and all that, they were interested in this kind of stuff. So they developed these practices as much as they could. People wanted to live as long as possible, right? So anyway, Chinese medicine has a lot to say, and we'll talk a little bit about those things today, just sort of hit on the major points and a lot of practical stuff. Because what good is it to talk about theory? You need to know sort of some practical stuff that you can do on your own to avoid doctors. Actually, I'm a huge proponent of avoiding doctors, including Chinese medicine doctors. Generally, you should try to avoid doctors. Just learn how to take care of yourself. And then, if you need a doctor, fine. But don't just rely on doctors. That's a bad idea. Because doctors, we have limitations, and we make mistakes even sometimes. And it's better you just learn how to take care of yourself, and then when you absolutely have to, of course, you can see doctors. Okay. So, prevention, wellness, and longevity through these health cultivation practices. So first, let me just talk a little bit about Chinese medicine very briefly, because without a little bit of background in it, this stuff doesn't make much sense. So we start to understand a little bit about Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine is a complete and independent medical system. I mean, it existed on its own for well over 2,000 years. Of course, it's changed over time, but the written record goes back at least 2,000 years. And it was practiced for all those years independently, without Western medicine and the other kind of medicine. So and it can be practiced that way now. But of course, there's a lot of integration that happens nowadays as well, both in China, here, wherever Chinese medicine is practiced. It integrates nicely with other forms of medicine. But in any case, Chinese medicine has its own understanding of physiology, which is function of the body, right? And of etiology, which are the causes of disease, so how disease arises. And pathophysiology, that's the mechanisms of disease. So not only how disease arise, the causes, but then sort of the mechanisms of different types of disorders. And then it has its own system of diagnosis, a complete own system of diagnosis that's totally different than Western medicine diagnosis or Ayurvedic or homeopathic or whatever, right? And then, of course, it has its own types of treatment, which most of you probably have either experienced or have heard of, things like acupuncture and Chinese herbs and blah, 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 right? So it's a complete and independent medical system. And the way Chinese medicine doctors work is we gather information, just like any doctor. Doctor's first role is to gather information, right? You go to the MDs, they ask you some questions, they do lab tests and imaging and blah, blah, blah. Well, Chinese medicine doctors do a similar thing, but because Chinese medicine is ancient, there were no lab tests, there were no CT, MRI, X-ray, so Chinese doctors had to rely on their senses to gather information. That's all they had. There was no choice. It wasn't like, oh, we don't like MRIs, so we're going to do this. It's like there wasn't any other options. So they developed this system we call 四针. 四 is 4, 针 means examination. So they're looking, so we look at people, we look at their face, their eyes, tongue, hands, the nails, the body, just the overall body shape, how people walk, the hair, all of that. And then listening and smelling, so people have an odor sometimes. That gives you a little piece of information, or the tone of their voice. Some person talk very quiet, you can barely hear them, very weak, or some person really loud, and some person might be kind of sing-songy, and other people sound kind of angry. That's all little bits of information that help you build a picture. And then, of course, you can ask. So you ask about appetite and thirst and digestion and bowel movement and sleep and blah, blah, blah. You can gather information that way. And then lastly is palpation, which is touching. So most famously is probably touching the pulse, right? But of course, you can palpate the abdomen, you can palpate acupuncture points, like that, okay? So we use these methods to gather information, and then once we have all that information, we analyze it, and then come up with a diagnosis. It's just like any medical system, they're all the same that way. They just look at those bits of information differently. And then Chinese medicine diagnosis, this is what really makes Chinese medicine unique. This is what sets Chinese medicine apart from any other kind of medicine, and it's really what makes Chinese medicine special. Acupuncture and herbs and all those things, that's not really what makes Chinese medicine special. I mean, those things are special, but even MDs do acupuncture now, and they don't use Chinese medicine ideas to guide their treatment. They use some biomedical idea, and they still get results. Still get results with that. Maybe, I don't know if their results are better or worse or as good as people using this system, but they claim to get results. And even like PTs, physical therapists, and so those people are also, and dentists, I think, even, using acupuncture sometimes. So it's not so much the treatments as it is this system of diagnosis that makes Chinese medicine unique. And Chinese medicine diagnosis is called 辩证. 辩 means to differentiate, like differential diagnosis. All medicine is based on differential diagnosis. So you have to differentiate between this disease and that disease and that disease, right? You differentiate. But Chinese medicine differentiates this thing called 症, which I've translated here as syndrome. Sometimes it gets translated as pattern. But in any case, this is a kind of holistic view of your body. Sort of at any given moment in time, all of us have a kind of 症. Like right now, all of you could be diagnosed, any of us could be diagnosed using Chinese medicine. It doesn't matter you have an illness or not, you have a zheng. That's sort of your constitution, the environment in your body, what's going on in your body at this moment. So Chinese medicine differentiates that, not disease. The ancient Chinese did recognize different diseases, but they gave them funny names. I shouldn't say funny. They gave them different names, not the same names that we have now for diseases, right? They have their own way of labeling stuff. But in any case, Chinese medicine, even they recognize diseases, in the end, they don't treat that. So say, for example, someone has asthma, which they definitely recognize. Like in the book Jingui Yao Le, which is from Han Dynasty, the Eastern Han Dynasty, it's 1800 years ago. There's a chapter that talks a lot about asthma. I study that chapter a lot because I treat a lot of asthma patients. They call it shaochuan, which sort of means like wheezing. But in any case, they recognize this disease, but then they talk about all these different syndromes, patterns of asthma. And you treat those patterns, those syndromes, not just treat asthma, okay? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But in any case, this zheng is kind of holistic diagnosis. It takes into account your whole body. And it's very individualized, okay? And it's very subtle. So you can detect problems through Chinese medicine diagnosis long before you're even aware of them yourself. You might feel perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with you. You go to the MDs, you're the picture of health. But a Chinese medicine doctor can always do this syndrome diagnosis. And it may turn out you're in great shape. But if there's little imbalances there, Chinese doctor can pick it up. Before you have any symptoms, before you have any disease, diagnosable disease, Chinese doctor can see there's some problem. And then because of that, they can give you advice on how to deal with that and prevent illness, promote well-being, and increase longevity. So Chinese medicine is really well suited for prevention, well-being, and longevity. It's set up that way. So anyway, this is, once you make a diagnosis, then the next stage is treatment, right? First you gather information, then you make a diagnosis, then you determine treatment. In Chinese medicine, we have this thing called 辩证论治. 辩证 is that syndrome differentiation, right? So we differentiate the syndrome. And then based on the syndrome, we determine treatment. Like I said, with asthma, there's all these different types of asthma, different syndromes, different patterns. And we treat that. So based on the syndrome differentiation, you determine a treatment. So ultimately, Chinese medicine treats these syndromes. Not really just go after a disease. You treat this syndrome. And then, hopefully, in some cases, the problem resolves. Chinese medicine is not a panacea, of course. Some things you can cure, and some things can get better, and some things you can't really do anything about. Right? So don't get the idea that Chinese medicine somehow miraculously cures everything, blah, blah, blah. But some things you can cure, right? So in talking about disease versus syndrome, right, Chinese medicine recognize diseases, but they really treat syndromes, right? That's very important. And like I said, that's what makes Chinese medicine unique above and beyond any other characteristic of Chinese medicine. Right? And then when you use acupuncture, you use Chinese herbs, you use whatever dietary ideas according to this, that's Chinese medicine. If you take Chinese herbs and use them according to modern pharmacological understanding of the herb, that's just allopathic medicine now. For example, statins, do you know this class of drugs? It's like the #1 selling class of drug in North America. It's for reducing cholesterol. That drug actually comes from a Chinese herb. called Hongqu. Hongqu is red rice yeast. So lovastatin was found in red rice yeast. They isolated that, and then they changed a little bit and patented it, and then make a billion dollar industry out of it. And then of course they made all these different. There's lovastatin and simvastatin and pravastatin, all these different statins. So they just take that basic chemical, which is from an herb, Chinese herb, in fact, and change it a little bit. So, but that's no longer Chinese medicine, right? I mean, you can't say that statins are Chinese medicine, can you? So, Chinese medicine is about using this methodology, applying treatment according to this methodology. So the MDs doing acupuncture are not doing Chinese medicine. They do acupuncture, but that's not Chinese medicine. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it's not Chinese medicine. So if it doesn't work, don't blame Chinese medicine. And if it does work, you can't give Chinese medicine credit for it either. Okay. So then there's some basic treatment principles that we've talked about. There's many, but just like kind of quickly to give you some idea about this. So this is all from a book called the Neijing, which is a very old, actually pre-Han Dynasty text, so it's maybe 2,500 years old. If there's deficiency, some deficiency in the body somewhere, then you supplement that. Okay? I mean, that makes sense, right? Like if there's some weakness here, then you just boost it. If there's an excess or accumulation of something, you drain it off, get rid of it. If there's cold, then you warm it up. And if there's heat, you cool it off. So it's almost simplistic in a certain way. And then Chinese medicine talks about treating root and branch. So the root is the underlying cause of a problem, and the branch is more just the symptoms. Sometimes you want to treat more on the branch. If it's more acute problem, you treat more on the branch. And then later when that problem's sort of resolved, you can go back and treat the root. Sometimes, especially chronic problems, you want to treat more the root. And you don't pay attention so much to the branch. So I have this idea in Chinese medicine about root and branch. And then about supporting upright, which is the normal healthy function in the body, and eliminate pathogen. So Western medicine is very good at eliminating pathogen. For example, if you have cancer, you get like chemotherapy, radiation. That very strongly eliminates pathogen and kills cancer cells. But what does it do to your upright, your zheng? It just completely devastates it. You lose your hair, you have no appetite, right? So Chinese medicine takes both of those things into consideration. Very concerned about the zheng, this upright, just the general function in your body. You need to take care of that, as well as eliminate pathogen. But you can't eliminate pathogen at the expense of the zheng, this upright qi. Otherwise, you actually can die. Right? When you run out of zheng, then you pass. And then this last one, 治未病, means treat before there is disease. This goes way, way back in Chinese medicine. That's from Neijing. Again, that's that pre-Han Dynasty book. It talks about that. So what is that? Treat before there is disease. Here you detect subtle problems before overt symptoms of disease are present. Because Chinese medicine is very well suited to that. And then use these health cultivation techniques to rectify those problems. That's called 治未病. Okay? And there's a lot of talk about this throughout the ages about sort of the practice of medicine, the best practices in medicine, ethical positions, blah, blah, like that. So we say 上宫 means the superior physician. 上宫治未病. The superior physician treats before there's illness. That just means this person has enough skill to suss out your problem before you even know about it, and then they help you prevent it from ever occurring. And you can live out your allotted years, which should be about 100 years. People should live to at least 100 years. If everything is right, human beings live to 100. If you don't follow the Da, like follow yin and yang and all this kind of stuff, then you cut your life short and you don't make it to 100. But you definitely should make it to 100 if you do everything right. I'm working on it, that's it, but we'll see how it goes. And then the middle physician treats disease that's already present. That just means they couldn't figure out your disease, that wasn't present yet, so they just wait until you get sick and then they treat you. That's what actually I would say most doctors do. And then the inferior physician just treats symptomatically. They don't even really recognize a disease or a disease pattern or syndrome patterns. They just treat symptoms. You have a headache, okay, here's something for your headache. Actually, it sounds really mean maybe, but a lot of MDs practice like that. But MDs also do some of this. So we shouldn't be like too hard on them. But Western medicine, it's no fault of the actual individual MDs. It's just Western medicine isn't well suited for this first one. They haven't got a model of physiology that allows them to see things well in advance. They just haven't developed that yet. Maybe it's not like they don't have any of that. They have some, but not so much. The Chinese medicine's not all about that, but largely about this. Okay. And then there's different kinds of treatment. Right? Once you determine your diagnosis, you decide the treatment method, treatment principle, then you have to pick from different kinds of treatment methods, right? Chinese medicine has 5 basic branches of treatment. And these are listed in the order from least to most invasive. The first is called Qigong, which probably people here have heard of. Qigong is just any kind of sort of intentional practice that's good for your body, that does something to your physiology in a good way, right? If you practice Qigong in a bad way, you also can make yourself sick. There's something called Qigong Bing. It's Qigong illness. So people practice Qigong the wrong way. That includes like driving in rush hour traffic. Just because you stand there and you do like this, and maybe I don't, doesn't mean that I don't practice Qigong. Actually, everything you do is Qigong. It's just Qigong in quotes is intentional. It's like you stand there and you do this, something like that. But everything you do actually is Qigong. It's maybe not intentional. So sitting behind the wheel in rush hour traffic is also a kind of Qigong, but probably not a very beneficial one, right? I mean, even like brushing your teeth does something to your physiology. Maybe not very much, but it does something. And getting angry or being happy, just everything you do is actually Qigong. Okay, so that's the first thing. You can affect your physiology just through what you do and what you think. Right? Even what you think. And then there's food there. Right? So eat this, don't eat that. And then there's manual therapies, right? Like massage, they're called Tui Na, that sort of thing. And then acupuncture, and moxibustion is using heat. And then finally herbal medicine. That's last. That's actually considered most invasive. More invasive than acupuncture, which maybe at first glance is kind of counterintuitive, but acupuncture just stimulates your body to do something, and herbs are potentially toxic substances you're taking into your body. That's definitely more invasive than acupuncture, right? So these health cultivation methods are all based on those 5 things, basically. Those 5 areas of medicine, you can use all those things for health cultivation.
So I have friends that believe in cupping and scraping. does that fall into?
Yeah, cupping and scraping is falls in this, well, kind of in these two areas. Because Tui Na people use that, and acupuncture people use that. That's sort of maybe falling more into here, but it's somewhere in there. These two things are somewhat randomly separated, actually. They're pretty closely related. But yeah, cupping and scraping is just, cups are these little vacuum cups you put on the body that just mechanically force blood circulation through vacuum. And scraping is also just forcing blood circulation by scraping on the skin and pushing the blood through the capillaries and that kind of stuff. So those are just some physical techniques. So back to this, right? Detect some little imbalance and then use these health cultivation methods, which are essentially diet and lifestyle practices. But lifestyle practices, it's like a huge, huge subject. There's so many, many different things we could talk about, right? And then use those 5 things: qigong, diet, some massage, even some moxibustion, or you could use acupuncture. And certainly herbs are fair game for health cultivation stuff. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then these are some famous doctors that developed health cultivation stuff. That's Sun Simiao, I mentioned him, from the Tang Dynasty. And Ye San is from the Song Dynasty, right? Gansu Wang is still alive. I think he's about 103. He lives in Shanghai. He's retired. But he talks a lot about health cultivation, so I read a lot of his stuff. I never had the chance to meet him. I was living in Shanghai, but I didn't meet him. So about health cultivation then, these are sort of the general areas. Diet, sleep, how to dress, of course physical activities, which include many, many things like qigong and whatever. Even just like how to sit, or, sorry? Did someone say something? Bathing, and then, not that there aren't practices that are unique to men, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk a little bit about practices that are unique to women. Sorry, guys. And there are other things too, but you know, we've only got an hour, so how much time? We still have half an hour. Okay. So first about diet. So food, despite popular belief until maybe recently, actually has a very profound effect on your physiology. You know, like maybe even now, I think medical schools, some of them don't talk very much about this. They start to introduce that. But the Chinese are obsessed with this for like centuries. They talk so much about food. Chinese people are more into food than any other people I've ever met, which doesn't mean there aren't people that are more into food than Chinese, I just haven't met them. And most Chinese have some basic understanding of the effects of food on your body. And there's no shortage of experts and self-proclaimed experts on the subject. Like everybody's grandmother will tell you, you know, you should eat this and don't eat that, and blah, 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 blah. And you know, like when I was working in Shanghai, there's one clinic where I worked where it's mostly women in this clinic for whatever reason. I'm not quite sure, but anyway, it's a lot of the doctors are mostly women, and the staff. So a lot of them are really into cooking, and we all have lunch together in this one room, and they just check each other's food out. They're like, oh, what are you eating? And they're like, oh, here, have some of this. And, you know, they look at my food, they're like, oh, that Western food is really funky. You know, how can you eat that stuff? And, like, of course, I eat a lot of Chinese food, too. And they're like, oh, Greg, you know, like, and we should really try to teach you how to cook better, you know? They're, like, really into cooking, you know? So they talk a lot about food. And like, oh, this season you should be eating this. And these are not all doctors. It's like a couple of them are doctors, but the rest of them are just like the staff. Like, the janitorial staff and stuff, they're like, got their food, and they talk a lot about it. So this is really common knowledge in China. And foods are used medicinally in Chinese medicine by doctors dealing with patients and just by people at home. Like I said, everyone knows something about this. And dietary advice is a routine part of Chinese medical consultations. And you almost never go to a Chinese medicine doctor and don't receive advice about food. They might not spend, a long time telling you, because Chinese medicine doctors in China are really busy. See like 50 patients in a morning. So they're just like, don't eat this and don't eat that and eat more of this. Okay, next. They write a prescription and like, yeah, don't eat cold and raw stuff, and you shouldn't eat spicy food and deep fried food. Like that kind of stuff. And then all Chinese people are like, oh yeah, of course, I already wasn't doing that. They already know. But when you treat Western patients, you have to spend a lot of time explaining, because, well, why shouldn't I eat cold and raw stuff? Well, But all Chinese people already know that. And all this is done in accordance with Chinese medicine principles. Right? Like we talked about, this syndrome differentiation. So everyone has their own kind of unique constitution, their own unique situation, and food is applied according to that. So my dietary needs are different than yours. It's not all the same. Okay? And then herbs are also used in cooking. So the line between herb and food is blurred. There's herbs, for example, like sanyao, lianzi, qianshi, all these things that are actually food. Sanyao is a kind of potato, and lianzi is lotus seed, and there's tons of herbs that are actually food. You just throw them in soup or something like that. And then you could use also stronger herbs in cooking if you want to. And people do. Now let's talk just a bit about the digestive system so you can understand why Chinese people don't drink ice water and don't like raw vegetables and that kind of stuff. So first, the food undergoes the first stage of digestion in the stomach, right? You eat your food, it goes down into your stomach. And then we say that the stomach rots and ripes the food, which is basically what it does. It just breaks it down into some little pieces, right? And some digestive enzymes, some hydrochloric acid in there, so it can all break down into little teeny pieces and get absorbed. And then the spleen, which is just a translation from the Chinese. It's not really your anatomical spleen. This is, in Chinese we call pi. Pi is probably really better translated as pancreas, but it's still not exactly your pancreas. The idea of the organs in Chinese medicine is different than Western medicine, so that's another talk. If you want, you can come to I do another talk called Demystifying Chinese Medicine. That will talk about this kind of that sort of stuff. But anyway, the spleen separates the essence from the dregs. That's just, the spleen pulls out the nutritious part, and the dregs, go down into the intestines. That is what happens. I mean, according to biomedicine, it's not your spleen. That sort of thing takes place in your intestines. Right? The intestines absorb nutrition that goes into your blood, and then it circulates around your body, right? And then the dregs go out through the stool, right? So this essence is absorbed by the intestine, and it's used to make blood, which then that circulates around and nourishes all the tissues in your body, right? And then the dregs go out through the stool. And the spleen and stomach like to be warm. Most things in life actually need some warmth to move. Cold makes things slow down and contract. So, like you can take a piece of food and freeze it, and it lasts a lot longer than if you put it out in 90-degree heat, right? So all sort of process in, maybe even in the universe, things go better if they're warm, if there's warmth, if there's warmth, there's movement. So same with your digestion. Your digestive system likes to be warm. If it's cold, it impairs it. One of the reasons is that cold causes contraction of blood vessels. Let's say you take your hand and put it in ice water, then all the blood vessels in your hand just contract and shunt the blood away from that cold water in order to preserve your body heat. The same thing happens in your stomach if you take ice water. Why wouldn't it? You take ice water, then all the blood vessels in the upper part of the GI tract, they contract. And then slowly your body heat warms that water up to body temperature, and then the blood vessels can relax again. But until that happens, the blood vessels are tightened up. And then what happens when the blood vessels are tight? The circulation is impaired. And all tissue in the body relies on blood circulation. Without blood circulation, you die. Your tissues become malnourished. They don't function well. And yeah, in the extreme case, they can die, right? So the spleen and stomach like to be warm, and they function better that way. So that's why Chinese people don't take ice drinks, and they don't even like raw food very much, because raw food is energetically cold. It takes a lot of your own energy to kind of cook it. And that just use up some of your metabolic strength in like cooking the food that you eat. Why not just cook it first and then eat it, right? So that's why Chinese medicine has a preference for warm food and drink, and why Chinese people in general have that preference is 100% due to Chinese medicine's influence in China. That comes from Chinese medicine. That's not just something that came out of thin air. Okay? So, some general principles about eating, okay? First is to eat meals at regular times. Because your body gets used to, your body's on a clock, first of all. Your physiology is actually related to time. And your body does different things at different times of the day without you knowing about it, because it's pretty subtle unless you pay really, really close attention. But your body's doing different things at different times of the day, and your body likes things to be really regular. That's actually one of the first rules of health cultivation, is regular lifestyle. If you want to live to be 100 and avoid doctors, you have really regular lifestyle. Go to bed at the same time every day, eat meals at the same time every day. Yeah?
It was mentioned this morning by Ron that this lady lived a long time because she just ate a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Have a,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, is don't overeat. But about eating meals at regular times, your body will get used to that. So if you have breakfast every day at 7, then, at 6 in the morning, your body's like, okay, the food's coming in an hour, so I'm going to start to get ready. The stomach starts preparing digestive juices and the enzymes, and then the food shows up on time and gets digested well. There's no sort of, half-digested stuff or like stomach acid and digestive enzymes floating around in there without the food, which also cause problems, right? And then, at lunch, whatever, 11:30, 12, the same thing. Your body's like, oh, it's time for lunch. The food shows up on time and everything goes smoothly. So if you do that throughout your life, you do yourself a lot of good. If you don't follow that, you can create problems. Not can, you actually almost sure create some problems. Almost sure. Mm-hmm.
Does that mean eating the same thing
No.
at the same time every day?
No. Chinese medicine basically says to eat widely. Eat a wide variety of stuff. All good stuff, but eat a wide variety of stuff. Also, life would be really boring if you just had to always eat the same thing. So that would just probably make your life shorter from boredom. So You have to like enjoy life too, right? And then don't overeat. This is hugely important. You have a question?
Yes, I wanted to know if it addressed eating many small meals throughout the day rather than 3.
Well, I think in general, if you're, in good shape, it's preferable to eat 3 regular meals, and then you could snack a little bit. If there's some particular problem that would benefit from eating smaller meals throughout the day, then okay. But in general, just 3 meals is fine. And then if you need to snack a little bit, it's okay. And then don't overeat. That's because if you overeat, then your body can't actually digest all that stuff. And then there's all this food in there that becomes metabolic waste. That stuff just rots. And
Should the dinner, last meal, be the lightest of the day?
yeah, that's also an important principle. You have a pretty good breakfast and a moderate lunch and a light dinner. A lot of people do the opposite, even skip breakfast and then kind of whatever for lunch, and then they have a big dinner. That's not a good idea. Especially you shouldn't eat much, like 2 to 3 hours before you go to sleep. Especially as you get older, like 3 hours is preferable. Because as you get older, your metabolism slows down. So you don't want to put a lot of food in there right before bed, because it won't be finished digesting. Then you have all this stuff in there that just rots, and then you have all this metabolic waste toxin that your body has to eliminate, which puts a burden on your system. And those things start to accumulate too, those toxins. So don't overeat. And what this feels like is qifeng bao, 70% full. It's like when you eat, you feel like you could eat a little bit more, then you stop. You don't eat until you're full. You're eating and say, oh, I could eat a little more, but stop there. Of course, if you're doing some serious physical labor, like digging ditches all day or something like that, then you probably should eat a little bit more. But especially with people now have a pretty sedentary lifestyle, then definitely should take it easy with food. Like very few people made themselves sick from under-eating. But a lot of people's health problems result from overeating. A lot of them, actually. Okay, and then avoid cold drinks. And I would add to that raw foods. That's not to say all raw foods bad, but generally things should be cooked. And cooked lightly. For example, when Chinese cook vegetables, sometimes they cook it for 15 seconds. They use really high heat, and then they put the vegetables in, and it's done. So,
Yeah, I have trouble with that because fruits are raw. We eat fruits raw.
well, right.
So,
Not all raw food is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you mean like
But-
raw beets and raw carrots and
Yeah, like too
celery?
much raw food,
Too much
essentially.
of that.
Like a certain amount is fine. Like some salad, like the weather's really hot, you have some
Right.
salad. The weather's hot, you have some fruit. That's not a problem, unless you have serious digestive problems. Like some people, they eat raw food, they get diarrhea. Then
Yeah.
okay, you better not eat it.
Mhm.
But if your digestive system's generally healthy, a certain amount of raw food is fine. But most of it, from a Chinese medicine perspective, should be cooked.
Mhm.
And like I said, most of it's lightly cooked. Because then you
Yeah.
break, the cell walls of plants are very tough. So if you use a little bit of heat to break them, when you heat it up, the water in the plant cells expands and then they pop. Then it's really easy to digest that stuff. When you eat it, actually, the nutrition comes out and you can get all the nutrition from it. It's easy on your digestion. If you eat stuff raw, then you need like 2-3 stomachs, like a cow, to achieve the same effect. Like, of course, when you eat things raw, all the nutrition's intact, but can you actually get at it? You don't necessarily get at it, because a lot of it will just end up passing through you, especially if you have weak digestion. So if you lightly cook stuff, you maintain most of the nutrition. I mean, even the vegetables are still a little crunchy and green, and they're not like overcooked and soggy and something like that. So they're just lightly cooked. That makes them easier to digest. And they're tastier too. And there's a lot of things that you just can't eat raw. All those Chinese vegetables, you have to be a goat to eat them raw. And they're horrid raw. But if you cook them, then they're lovely. And the Chinese have a huge range of vegetables. Just should go to Chinatown, like 82nd or wherever. Yeah, and they have all these great vegetables, you know. So you should eat widely. Eat all those different things because they all have different kind of nutrition. Okay, and then cold drinks, like I said, when you take cold things, it dampens digestive function, essentially by impairing blood circulation. When the blood circulation in the stomach is impaired, then the stomach's not secreting enough hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes. So especially around meals, it's better not to take cold drinks. If it's 100 degrees out and you're super hot and you have a little cold drink, that doesn't matter. But generally, especially with food, you don't want to. And Chinese people, even when it's 100 degrees out, they drink hot tea. Because it makes you sweat a little bit. And then when the sweat comes out, you feel a little cooler. And then generally eat more vegetables. Vegetables are the antidote to everything. You cannot overeat vegetables. Just eat tons and tons of vegetables, especially green leafy vegetables. The Westerners don't eat nearly enough green leafy vegetables. Not nearly enough.
I had a doctor tell me eat them every day. And
Oh, absolutely.
sometimes, I mean, that sounds radical, but
No, not
but
at
to
all.
Americans, dark leafy greens every lunch and every dinner. I mean,
Even breakfast.
and I eat them for
You
breakfast.
can use them for breakfast if you like, yeah. Well, like for Chinese people, if they don't have vegetables for a day, they freak out.
Yeah, well, I can
It's like,
imagine.
what do you mean there's no veg? It's like,
Right.
that's not eating,
Right.
you know? And I mean, I've been doing Chinese medicine for 20 years and spent more than half that time in China, so I've kind of become sinicized, and I freak out now if I don't have my vegetables, you know? So, I went to Montana a couple years ago. My mom's family's from Montana. And the foods, they have like really great ribs and stuff. It's delicious, but there's no vegetables.
Greens.
It's terrible, you know. Like there's this huge thing of ribs. Went to a rib place, you know, this gigantic thing of ribs. You can't possibly eat it all. I could eat like a quarter of it at the most, right? And then the vegetable was like a little teeny, like maybe 2 mouthfuls of some summer squash. Wow, that's a recipe for all kinds of chronic degenerative disease. So anyway, more vegetables. You can't overeat vegetables. Eat all different kinds, all different colors of vegetables, cook them different ways, blah, blah, blah. And generally less animal products. Chinese medicine doesn't promote vegetarianism. We generally don't think that being a vegetarian, especially vegan, is healthy. You do need a certain amount of animal protein, but not that much. Nothing like most Westerners eat. Just a little bit. Especially if you're really physically active, then you can eat a little more. If you're more sedentary, you can eat less. If the weather's hotter, you can eat less. If it's colder, you can eat a little more. But generally, not so much animal products. And definitely you need to get good quality animal products nowadays, because the further up the food chain you go, the more pollution, those chemicals accumulate in the animal products. So you should get really organic stuff if you can. And then it's important to understand the nature of foods. And what do I mean by that? That herb and food in Chinese medicine are described by these parameters. So we talk about the temperature of a food, which is not just the physical temperature, like I serve you a plate of hot pasta or something like that, but actually what's the effect of this food on your body. Some things have a heating effect, which you can only understand through a Chinese medicine lens, like what heating does to your body. And some things have a cooling effect. Some things are neutral. There's a whole range of stuff. This temperature, right? So it's important to understand the temperature of food, and then when you know about your own condition, like you're a little on the cold side, then you take food a little on the warmer side. If you're a little on the heat side, then you take food a little on the colder side. And then also when you're planning a meal, like you could have, Chinese meals are really well balanced usually. It's like you have some food that's kind of hot, but then to balance that out, you have something that's a little cooling.
What would those be?
Say, for example, mabo tofu. Mabo tofu is a kind of spicy tofu dish from Sichuan. So tofu itself is really cold, but chili peppers are hot. So you put those two things together, it's kind of balance each other out. Or if you were to have like spicy lamb, for example. Lamb is really hot, and then you cook it with some cumin and some chili peppers, which is sort of Sichuan style, or like a Xinjiang style cooking. That's really hot. Then you could have like some tofu or like a cucumber salad. I mean, it's interesting that in like Xinjiang, which is a Muslim area in China, they eat a lot of lamb. Of course, they don't eat pork, right? So they eat lamb. They love cucumber salad. Lamb is really hot. So then you have that with cucumbers, raw cucumbers, in fact. Raw cucumbers cooling. So that's balancing it out, right?
Cucumbers in yogurt? Or?
Yeah, and typically with yogurt, yeah. With sheep's or goat milk yogurt. Yeah, it's really good. Making my mouth
I'm
water.
pretty hungry.
The food in China is amazing. Okay, and then there's flavor, which is the actual flavor of food, but more than that, it's sort of understanding how flavors affect your body. For example, the sweet flavor tonifies the body, and bitter flavor drains things out of your body, and the salty flavor kind of softens stuff. And so to understand how those flavors affect your physiology is another aspect of this. And then the food and herbs go to different parts of your body. They call guijing. Jing are the, this, whatever you want to call them, meridians or something. I don't like that term. That's for another talk. They go to different parts of your body. So some foods nourish, your liver, and some things nourish your kidneys, and some things good for the eye, and some things good for your hair, and some things good for your skin, blah, 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 like that. Okay? So food in China is described that way. Like, people know what a tomato does to your body, and what an apple does, and what beef does, and what chicken does, and what different kinds of fish do, and cherries. Cherries are good for the blood, actually. And then the function. So they all have a function, like tonify the spleen, or tonify qi, or tonify blood, or dry dampness, or moisten the lung, or something like that. Right? For example, Asian pear, those crunchy pears, those kind of crunchy round pears like that, those moisten the lung. They're very cold, though, so they're hard on the spleen and stomach. So Chinese people typically cook them. Yeah, they cut them and core it, and then cook it with some rock sugar. Oh, it's really good. If you have a dry cough, like a tiny little bit of phlegm, but the phlegm doesn't like to come out, but mostly just very dry cough, like maybe if you live like in Bend, Oregon, or someplace like that, where it's super dry, then in the fall especially it's really dry, then you have this cooked pear with little rock sugar, and that moistens the lung. And that'll make your skin nice too, because the skin and the lung are related to each other. So you got to know about the function of food. And then foods have a kind of indication. Like for this problem, this food is good, and for this problem, this food is good. And then you could add to that contraindications. For this problem, this food should not be eaten. For this other problem, this food should not be eaten. Like if you have some skin problem like eczema or psoriasis, probably better stay away from spicy food and like deep fried food. Because generally, those kind of skin conditions belong to heat, or heat and dampness. Spicy food creates a lot of heat in your body, and deep fried food creates heat and dampness in the body. Like pizza, sort of damp heat. A little pizza is good though. I'm all for like eating a little bit of junk food, just so you enjoy life, you know. Because otherwise, if you get really uptight about food, then life's just starts to suck. You have to have fun, you know, like enjoy life. So there's a remedy for all of that, which is vegetables. So if you want some pizza, then you just have like a mound of vegetables with it, you know, and then you're good to go. Okay. So then cooking with herbs, how are we doing for time? Oh, not much time left. You can also cook with herbs. Like I said, the line between herb and food is kind of blurred. So Chinese people like to cook with herbs. For example, wood ear is a kind of herb, good for the lung, and Chinese people are always cooking with that. It's a kind of fungus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like there's black one and white one. The black one's good for the kidney, and the white one's more for the lung. And they just, you know, fry that with some greens, right? Wood ear fried with bok choy or something like that, right? Which I had some wood ear here recently. It wasn't good. So I don't know if you get good wood ear in the States or not.
I was going to say, is that even something that's available here?
Yeah.
Is it dry? Is it
It's dry. Yeah, it's dry. You rehydrate it and then.
Okay, like other dried mushrooms.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Not in soups.
Yeah, put it in
Put it in
soups
soup.
often. Yeah. But the one I got was really tough. I was disappointed. And I heard someone recently tell me they don't like wood ear, and I just wonder if it's because they
Yeah,
have not a good one.
Right, probably.
But in any case, foods and herbs, of course, both affect your physiology. So why not cook with some herbs, right? For example, postpartum, Chinese people pay a lot of attention to this time, postpartum time for women. And there's certain foods you should eat. They promote recovery from pregnancy and delivery, which is obviously very draining. And they promote lactation as well, and make the quality of the milk better even. So certain foods that all Chinese people know that. They all do that after the baby's born. Okay, then about sleep. Then we'll just kind of go quickly because we're running out of time. Early to bed, early to rise. That's again goes back to this kind of chronobiology, that your body is actually on a clock and doing different things at different times of the day. And people are not nocturnal. We didn't evolve being nocturnal. And our physiology didn't change since light bulbs were invented. Sorry. So you need to go to bed when it gets dark and get up when it gets light. If you want to live to be 100 and avoid doctors. That's just, you can't avoid that. The same 8 hours of sleep, like 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. or 12 midnight to 8 a.m. is not the same. Not the same. Even modern research shows that. There's research also on people that work night shifts and work in the airline industry and fly through many time zones, and their biological clock is all out of whack. They have higher rates of cancer, depression, heart disease, blah, blah, blah. So, and actually, I think in almost every language around the world you have a saying like that. Like in English, we say early to bed, early to rise. In Chinese, we say 早睡早起. Let's go to bed early and get up early. And I had some Russian patients tell me they have a saying like that too. And I think everybody knows this. That's really, really true.
I have heard that the sleep you get before midnight is your best sleep.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, those, like the 3 hours, like 9 to 12, that's probably the most important sleep. So like 9 to 3, those 6 hours are the best. And of those, 9 to 12. So if you go to bed at 12, you just deprive yourself of some very important, certain things happen in your body during that time, but they only happen really well when you're sleeping. And that's important sort of rejuvenative physiological processes that happen during that time that are helped by sleep. If you're not sleeping, they still occur, but not very well. So you just make yourself age prematurely by not sleeping early. Okay? So that's not all sleep is equal.
Why do so many people wake up at 2 in the morning?
Take 3.
Yeah, there's different reasons, but oftentimes in Chinese medicine have to do with the blood. The poor quality of the blood. And then the body just not quiet. Then the nervous system become active and then think, you wake up. So there's different things that can cause that. But that's often very treatable. And then to have a regular schedule, go to bed more or less the same time each night, sort of within an hour time. Okay.
We have to come to class later, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe let me skip to the last slide, because this is very...
Oh my God.
And more. Sorry. This is very cool though. This is from Ganzu Wang.
I love this.
Ganzu Wang is this 103-year-old guy in Shanghai who talked about health cultivation. So this is his 8 Chinese characters for longevity.
Eat like an ant.
Yeah, so it's Tongxin means have a heart like a child. So just be lighthearted, right? Not take everything too seriously. And then eat like an ant, right? Don't overeat. Have desire like a turtle, which maybe have 2 meanings. One is don't be overly ambitious and sort of like type A kind of personality, maybe. And also probably have to do with like bedroom arts, which is sort of moderate bedroom activity a little bit, because that's depleting. And then be active like a monkey. Always being active. Actually, sitting is bad for you. Sorry, you're sitting and I'm standing. The sitting is not really good for you. Better get one of those stand-up desks. They even have treadmill desks.
I was going to say, there's an article, the article in the New Yorker magazine is about
Treadmill
walking
desks.
desks.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
It looks a little goofy. I don't know how you'd have a meeting that way. But...
So there's only 4 characters, right?
No, there's 8 characters.
Oh, I see the 8 characters, I see.
Oh,
Okay, gotcha.
Steve.
There's 2.